Hey everyone, welcome to This Much I Know, the Seedcamp podcast. And today's guest is a good friend, Matt Mazzeo, general partner at Coatue Management. Matt, show us that mug. Let's get a good look.
Let's go, team. We're going to do some mind-blowing concepts today. This is what we're working on. Carlos, how are you, man?
Man, I'm super excited to finally get this chat and to be able to pick your brain on a couple of ideas and themes.
Let's go.
So to kick things off, I think it's useful for people to know a little bit about what it means to be a general partner at Coatue Management, what the organization does and where you fit into it, just to give us the lay of the land.
All right, let's riff. So I'm a general partner at Coatue. I've been here about 2.5 years. Part of my job, most of my job, is investing into early stage companies. So Coatue's been around for 20 years. We started as a hedge fund about a decade ago. We started investing into private markets with a growth fund. We're now in our 4th of those. In about 2.5 years, I joined to help us build out a venture fund and recruited a bunch of friends and team. And then we raised about $700 million to invest from the seed stage to the Series B, which is where I spend the bulk of my time. I invest primarily into sort of like consumer and then consumer fintech and consumer enterprise businesses. I can go deep into each one of those. But really the job is the same thing I've been doing for more than a decade, which is like finding early stage companies that I like to work on, finding people that I like to work with, and giving them both capital, resources, relationships, and sort of getting hands dirty to do it. And now that I'm at Coatue, it's kind of a different level of it as well. The resources that you can bring when you're investing from the very beginning of a company all the way into like every subsequent round into the post-public ecosystem, and the platform that the firm has built over the last 20 years is just a different level of resource than I've ever had at my disposal to go and do it. So it's been exciting.
That's great. Well, we'll be learning a little bit more about what you're looking at in a second. But one of the things that I mentioned to you before we started that I like to do is to get to know the person, is to talk about early days. Talk about your, the moment right after you graduated, what you studied and what your first job was like. What was that process?
I'm happy to. So I was basically a psych and ec guy in college. So I graduated Harvard 2005, and I came out of college. Everyone else had a plan, a really strict, people had a defined destination. They were going banking or consulting. They were going law and medicine, and they really had it nailed down. And I didn't. I frankly, I had no idea what I wanted to do with my life. I got back to LA, slept on my mom's couch, and I started talking to a few friends, and they all said, hey, have you ever thought about being a talent agent? Like mentors who knew me. And the only frame of reference I had on that was kind of salesy people. And they were, I kind of got insulted by it, but I decided to go and learn about what it was. And I realized that it kind of fit my personality perfectly, of going out, finding people that you wanted to work with and helping them build a career. And so, I talked to a couple friends, and one said, hey, you should go to CAA. And that's where I started. So I ended up being, a couple weeks out of graduating, and I was lucky enough to land a job working for the guy who ran the film finance department at CAA. And I was an assistant to an assistant. And eventually I found my way to an agent there who was developing this entirely new line of business called business development at CAA, which then meant starting entirely new divisions of the company. So within a couple of weeks of graduating, I'm working for this guy named Michael Yanover, and I started, basically helping CAA develop into all these other categories.
It's fascinating because we were talking about how we're both friends with Yanover, and I was referencing that I had watched a couple of YouTube interviews of you earlier where you were talking a little bit about the lessons you learned from him on how to ask questions and kind of how to support and how to give advice to founders. Maybe if you're looking back in those days and you had to summarize kind of the top 3 things that Yanover taught you, and I'll send this to him and be look, what are the top 3 things you learned about how to engage with people to be able to really add value there for anybody who's listening to this, who's either an angel investor or a seed investor who's engaging with founders, and for founders to also have an expectation of what value add means?
Yeah, I think what was interesting, and one of the things that I learned from Michael was he asked questions in a way that got to 2 sort of truths. It was he asked questions to understand. He got really to he wanted to know what you were working on and sort of had a framework for how to ask questions to get to the meat of it. I'd never seen in my life somebody who could understand a business or an idea faster. And the reason is just he had seen so many over his years that like he would come in and like within it felt like a few minutes he could dissect a business. It didn't matter where the business was in media entertainment, like that's where he was focused, you know, because he had jobs in film and TV and music and video games and all, and you know, and digital businesses, and sort of like having an understanding for the questions to ask to get to the meat of what a business was driven by was really important. And then the other side was equally important, was understanding, you know, how to get to the heart of the person and like what mattered to them and what drove them. And asking both of those questions in tandem. And what I find is in venture, often people can really laser in on this first one. Like there's a desire to like really get to the heart of the company, and you kind of miss the entire other part of it, which is getting to the person on the other side of the table. And so what was unique is he never started a conversation around like, you know, tell me what you're working on. That was it. That was never the start. It was always like, how did you get here? Like understand the person first. You know, it's funny. There was a moment in time between Lowercase and Coatue where I was thinking of starting my own fund and calling it Backstory Capital, because largely it was built around this idea that like, and I got it from Michael, was understanding someone's backstory is crucial. And what pieces brought them to where they are is kind of like is the magic of doing this job too. And so he would ask these questions, and by the end of the conversation, there was a third thing that he would get. So if the number one was like, you know, the person, number two is the business and the meat of it, and number three was how he could help. And, you know, he wouldn't do it in this like VC value add way. It was never, you know, it was never like, what can I do to add value? That was never the conversation. Frankly, this was like a CAA truth. Like these three things, like understanding the person, understanding, you know, the career, and then understanding the last, which was like how you could make an impact. This was something that I got from everybody at CAA, which was like, you would find it. It was like panning for gold. You would, in the midst of the conversation, you'd be sitting there sifting for, you know, what you could do to make an impact on that person's life. And then you would do it. You wouldn't ask for help. You wouldn't ask for like, you wouldn't like, you know, ask them what you could do to add value. It was like an active listening process through the entire conversation. And once you found it, you knew it. And it was like, I watched the agents at the company, and watched the best people in business do this consistently. There's one of the guys who ran the firm, Richard Lovett, was probably the best I'd ever seen at this. And at some point he would write down something in his notebook, and I would ask him like, what did you write down? He's like, he would write down the thing that would be most important in his purview that he could do to help that person in their career. And then he would deliver on it, unsolicited, unasked. It was like a surprise. It was like a gift that he could do for that person. And forever, it was like a reminder of like, wow, that person really cared about me. And if you can nail those three things in a conversation, you've nailed it. And it's kind of how I run every conversation that I'm in now.
And how, I mean, like the reason why I think it's become a meme of VCs saying, how can I add value, is partially because some of them probably are very cynical about it, if not entirely just saying it as a matter of course. How do you see in a world where, you know, every investor is trying to get a head up on somebody else, that it doesn't just start losing its value? I mean, where did this meme come from? You know, it must be ground truth to it.
Yeah, that's the problem with it, is I think the meme came from like really great intent, like the venture ecosystem and the tech ecosystem. Like one of the things that this part of the world has that I haven't seen in many other places is a willingness to help. Like you can go out there and get advice and support, and like you can ask questions in a way that like the entertainment industry never would have shared. Like, you know, when you go to another founder, when you go to a VC and you sit down and you finally get the time to like ask questions, or you just go on like Quora or Twitter, there's a reason why those platforms are so active among this community. And the reason is because people are actually willing to go out. Like I can't even count the number of mentors I've got in tech who I've never met. I've just read everything they've ever written. You know, Fred Wilson, when I got started, you know, I hadn't met him yet. I read everything that Fred had. Bill Gurley, before I met Bill, everything that he wrote, you know, it just goes on and on. Like there is a willingness to help in this ecosystem. Where it gets memeified is like when it's transactional, where people are like, I helped you, and the quid pro quo of it. That's where it gets, you know, particularly gross. But like the idea that you can go out and get helped in this ecosystem is not something I'll ever knock. And it's like, if you approach the world like that, if you approach the world where I'm just going to help, you build incredible reputation. It comes back to you like 1,000-fold. It's like the greatest hack in the universe is like this compounding help. and you just like if you just go in with that intention in life, compounding support and compounding help is like the greatest investment you can make in yourself, because eventually at some point, you remember the people, and at some point the world is small enough that those collisions happen again, and you have somebody that like you help again and you deliver back to. And like if you treat the world multi-turn like that, you start to realize that it's like a really beautiful place to be. And it's like, I don't know, I was lucky enough that I remember at every turn in my life, like the people that like helped me get where I am today. I have a weird memory for it of like the individuals along this path of my life. And I was fortunate at different turns in my life to have people come and like help me and support me and rescue me when I needed rescuing, and like, and mentor me. And you eventually pay it back. But like, it's sad that it's become a meme, because I think the heart of it is golden.
Do you think that as the ecosystem has been evolving, that and as deals have gotten more competitive with time because there's more funds, do you feel like that meme has taken more value? Do you think that the increased competitiveness is helping founders? And if you're a founder, let's say based in Europe, is the Valley the next best place to go raise just because of the hyper competitiveness, people trying to outdo each other? Or would you say that there's no correlation there?
I think it's been a benefit for everybody. I think having like more capital in market means more founders have access to capital. It means that like, the industry has been sort of like become by sort of forced to become more, transparent. It has been forced to like, we moved from like Sand Hill Road and like, you got to, have an address, and you've had all these like, platforms like Y Combinator sort of like, sort of totally, open, and clearly a lot of work left to do on that path. But like having more competition, more dollars at work has been net better for founders, no question.
How has that evolved over time? Like, has it now been that the role of the typical investor has now fractured into maybe facilitating checks alongside angels who are now leading the charge for seed stage? How's that shifted now? Like, what's a typical, say, pre-seed, seed, Series A round look like today versus a couple of years ago in terms of who's leading it, what they're doing for the company?
Yeah, I think that's actually this is like constantly evolving. I think the only truth there is, whatever I say today is going to be outdated in a few months, candidly. Like,
yeah.
And I look at it more like a blend from like every stage. There is no one path anymore. Like, you don't need to go and lock in your lead to go get your fundraising done. There's like 1,000 options available to you. You can go to AngelList. You can go to an incubator. You can go to an accelerator. You can go to a seed fund. You can go to a Series A fund. Like the blend of like fundraising options available to a company, whereas it used to be maybe like I have to go and pitch this to the 20 funds on Sand Hill Road. Like that day is totally blown apart, right? Like, there is no singular path, and there's a lot of ways to win. If you're trying to like fundraise for a company, those options are like wildly more accessible today. Again, a ton of work that needs to be done on it, but having more optionality there has been net beneficial for founders, I think. The challenge is like for those who haven't, with that optionality comes less clarity on the right path, and like. And I've seen more and more people step into sort of mines along the way because they fundraise in ways that are like a little bit more exotic, and like, with that increases the risk associated with a different fundraising environment or like a different fundraising.
Give me an example of what you mean by exotic. What's exotic today?
You raised, a series of notes, like you raised a bunch of different safe notes along the way at different price points. And like in some cases, what you've done an exceptional job of is minimizing dilution because you've been able to like migrate the price point up at every safe. The problem that you might incur is like, you don't realize as you migrate each safe that like you haven't converted yet. And so when you do go and raise your first equity round, you convert it all at once and you're blown away by how much dilution you've taken. And it's like, sometimes that like exoticism like is beneficial because you were able to get the business to where it is. Sometimes it's, it's a net negative because you might not be as sophisticated as, the VC on the other side of the table. And so you might be taking on unknown dilution or unknown challenges along the way. But that's like one example of 100, right? Like sometimes you take on too much dilution early. Sometimes, you bring in, I don't know, there's a bunch, you bring in a strategic maybe too early or in the wrong moment in time. And you like, complicate fundraising narratives down the line. And so, I think one of the benefits of having more optionality is you have a lot more flavors to choose from. The downside is that it becomes harder to understand what the market perception will be 1 turn, 2 turns down the line.
Yeah. Well, that's a good sort of transition point to bring it back to your transition from CAA to Lowercase, because Lowercase is such an institution and such a great brand in the region, and it was interesting to see how you made that leap. And I'd be curious to hear how you made that leap and sort of what was the drive behind it.
Yeah, the story goes, I was the only person at CAA kind of really focused on this ecosystem of they kind of let me go run wild. So I got an office in San Francisco. CAA was really about film, television, music. For those who don't know, we had about half of the talent in the ecosystem on our platform. And that meant we were representing them in film, television, music, sports, licensing, endorsements, all the different areas that you could imagine for a career for artists like Will Smith and Tom Hanks and Tom Cruise and Spielberg and Oprah and a whole bunch of different categories of talent. And my role was helping them figure out all things startup and digital. So literally I got to I went up a couple days a week. I was, covering, VC firms and tech companies and startups the same way that my colleagues covered studios, networks, sports teams, leagues, and brands. I got to go cover tech. And it was awesome. The most fun you could possibly have in your 20s. And I was out there when Netflix or when Amazon or Tencent was how do we partner with talent? I was basically the person. If you were an early stage startup, which one day, that meant you were YouTube, right? When Steve and Chad came down to LA and they were how do we partner with talent? They were meeting with Michael and I, and that was we were the front lines for all the talent of the agency. So if you wanted to learn about that ecosystem, moving tech and entertainment, it was just a weird moment in time to be able to learn at hyper speed. And I was the one covering all things Y Combinator and South by Southwest. And in the process of that, I got to know a bunch of the early people who were actually building in this ecosystem and who for who LA and entertainment and media was interesting, but super far off, not core to what they were working on. And I just loved the gooey middle between those two worlds. And then my friend who was basically working with Eric Schmidt at Google, Sacca, he started angel investing. He was doing the first sort of super angel-y fund where he was raising a little bit of capital. And he was hey, Maz, you should really join me. We should do this together. You're basically a VC. You just don't have a fund. You're helping all these companies succeed. You're helping build partnerships. You're even starting companies where you're raising money for things like Funny or Die and Hussein and others. You should really just do this with me and let's run at it. And I'm listen, I have the most fun job you could possibly imagine. CA, and I love the people. I thought I was going to retire in a suit. That was it for me. And then I don't know if you've ever met Chris, but he's a very compelling human. And so when he wants to sell, he can generally sell. And so he sold me. The vision of Lowercase and the two of us running after companies and early stage investing. And it's a compelling vision. And it was some of the most fun times I've ever had in my life.
What was the biggest few lessons? I'll give you an example of one of the lessons that I learned. I used to be an engineer, and when I transitioned into investing, probably the biggest mistake I made early days was to fall in love with the idea, because you like the solution and you like what they were working on, but it was not the right team to make it happen. And in that I had to learn that lesson the hard way. What was it like for you in those early years with Sacca, the lessons that you had learned to some extent at CAA, but that in practice within a fund no longer made sense or needed adaptation?
Practice with fund needed adaptation. I think it's hard to count the life lessons. It was a totally new world, right? And I think I learned I don't even know where to start. I'll just start riffing and you tell me when to shut up. How about that? I learned how to evolve the questions that I was asking and how to lead a narrative. I learned how to storytell. I learned how to go and sit down with a founder and narrate the business of that founder's life or of what they were going after and put it into language that sometimes the founders didn't even have yet. And because you have this 30,000 foot view that I would watch Chris go into a scene with the founder and he would come out with the screenplay of the company. He would be able to write the narrative often better than the founder had before. And that was really valuable to a lot of people. He had a saying spreadsheets or stories beat spreadsheets every time. And the reason is because, he could tell a narrative for a founder and a product and a market and opportunity with such clarity that it would often inform how that founder then raised from the rest of the funds and other partners. And it was because we sat in this weird middle between like funds and employees and multiple companies that we had a narrative for opportunities in a way that others didn't when they were sort of heads down. I think that's one thing I learned. I think I learned a lot about like conviction early and just finding people who were like, boldly humble and had a superpower and how to spot that superpower. And I'd always had that, because that's kind of what CA teaches you is like identify the outliers, superpower, and then back the truck up into that. Like when you find those people in life, hold them close and like, do whatever it takes to help them in the process. Like find the things that they're weak on and like go all in and like do the work with them. And like Chris was just better at that than almost anybody, right? He would find the person, find the idea, and then he would like double down, triple down. When he had conviction, there was no hesitation in that. And like, I think there's a feeling when in this industry, one of the challenges is like, when you find something you believe, there's an interest in convincing people that you're right. There's a natural temptation to stop feeling like an idiot and like show the world that you believe this thing to be true and convince them that it is true. And it is like the challenge of venture is, one of the challenges of venture is like, you have to hold this state of conviction into things that are unproven where you look like an idiot for a long period of time. And the goal is to have that period of time feel not as long because it's an uncomfortable place to be. And the best investors hold that conviction irrespective of whether the world sees it yet. And not only that, they double down into it before it's obvious to the rest of the world. They are willing to feel like idiots for a long period of time because they paid a price that was too expensive, because the market was bigger than the world expected, because that willingness to be ridiculed is actually the goodness. It's like, it's when you're holding something that is valuable potentially that other people don't see. And some people just don't give a shit about it. Chris in particular doesn't give a shit if the other world doesn't believe him yet. And like the idea that he would like try to pitch people on an idea was anathema to him. If he was pitching an idea, he should just be investing in it more heavily himself. And so that's what he did. Like Twitter, he doubled down, tripled down every step of that company, tried to buy more of that company when it was not obvious to everyone else. And he ended up making a lot of money in the process doing it. And I think that feeling of like, I should stop trying to convince other people that I'm right. I should just back the truck up when I feel that. That feeling is a big idea. And when you can like really feel comfortable doing it and back the truck up into things that you believe, you start like seeing the world in a different lens. You stop trying to convince people and you start trying to like invest more heavily behind that conviction.
So during your time working with Chris, I mean, and obviously leading your own investments, what is the founder relationship or the investment that you feel most proud of looking back?
Oh, wow.
Not which one made you, which one was the most successful, but one where you were like, okay.
It's a hard framing and it's not the right framing. It's a bait that I won't take. And the reason I won't take it is because like, I don't separate. And my wife will tell you is like, I don't have a separation between like, this isn't a job for me. It's not like a founder relationship. It would be like me asking you like, who's your best friend? I don't know. Like, it doesn't feel right to be like, it's this one. And this is the one I'm most proud of. Like, I love working with people. And I love the fact that like my job affords me the opportunity to work with a lot of people who are like brilliant and driven and motivated by, going and building something in the world. And like, I don't know, that mentality is something like intoxicating for me. And, the idea that like, I don't think about it like a favorite. Like you could ask me like, what's my best returning as an investor? Like, let
me flip it then. Which is the lowest point during that period? Because I mean, we all have one. Like one of the ones that I wrote a blog post about that happened to me about 5 years ago was there was an argument with another co-investor around a specific issue. And, at the time I look back and I could have handled it a lot better by just being, even though it was more painful, is to be more upfront about that specific scenario. Yeah. Like, dude, look, you're screwing me over. And I just avoided it and then it just blew up later. But what was it for you?
the underpinning what you just said is the root of all of them. And it's something that now I aggressively like snuff out whenever I feel it. And the feeling is avoidance and expectation mismanagement. It's like when I believed something and I expected something that I didn't confront, and I knew that there was a tension there, we all feel it. Every single person. It's like, it's universal. And it's like your willingness to like confront those tensions fast that like actually leads to like avoiding pain later. Like the harder, like if you're able to hit head on and just say what you believe and say what you mean and flesh out your expectations, like, and discuss them publicly, transparently, like I have this belief or I have this expectation and I feel like we might be on different pages on this. It's okay to have that confrontation, but like not having it leads to like many, it's like building on toothpicks. And what ends up happening is you layer on top of these toothpicks without ever like discussing the bottom, and it always collapses. The bigger the building, the bigger the collapse. Like, and the more time you take between like when you start to feel that disconnect versus like when you actually confront it, like that is actually like the secret to good relationships. Like, and frankly, it's like with friends, with business partners, with like investments, with your partner, like just hitting that tension head on is actually like one of the best secrets to life I've found. Like, and I refuse to live in that tension. I would rather just like have the hard conversation immediately and discuss something up front. And if you do it, like if you relish in that, in like, you know, diffusing the tension, you just have fewer bombs in your life and you just feel better.
Yeah.
We all feel this. Like, I am sure that right now, when I said that, some people watching this or listening to this had something in their brain that was like, I feel that tension right now. There is some relationship where you are letting a tension fester. And if you feel that in anything, my advice to whoever is listening to this is go and have a hard conversation today, because avoiding it is not going to help you. And at some point it will explode in your face. Go have the hard conversation. That's my best advice. Unsolicited.
Yeah, no, it's great advice, and I would echo that. And I think that what's tricky is that not every investor is as open as you, Matt. And I think if a founder were listening to this, and there's a few that I could think of top of my head that would be a bit sort of like concerned about having to even try to bridge that conversation with their existing investors. But you know, it's I think you would echo that it's something you just have to find a way of doing it and try to expedite as much as possible. Yeah,
the answer is it is never going to be comfortable. That's the truth. It will never go away. It will never be comfortable. It's like people who stay in a bad relationship for years longer because they're not willing to go through the hard breakup. And like the problem is you screw up the opportunity cost that could have happened post the conversation. And two, like you end up having like the mismanagement of expectations only gets worse. Like, and both people obsess on it on both sides. You are both thinking about the same mismatch in expectations. And so that brain time is just like, it starts to like complicate things even worse. When you feel it, like some people obsess on it over and over and over. And you can just expect that if you're thinking about the mismanaged expectations, the other person is too. And it's just like,
let me pick up on that thread, and I want to come back to the sectors that you're interested in today.
Yeah,
the areas I want to come back to that. So don't worry, we will. But I think that you brought up a really interesting point, which is sometimes there's a mismanagement of expectations that can form between founders and investors, not because there's like a suppression of the truth. Rather, it could be philosophical approaches. Like, for example, take a founder who might have a very specific product vision, and that product vision isn't necessarily mapping to a particular way of exploring customer development. And then you have investors who have a specific view on, like testing this out. And I'm just curious, like, how do you reconcile that?
Yeah. So it's funny. This actually happens like at every step too. So like, again, it's like being transparent about it is the most important thing. But like, I find this problem happens between investors and like, and founders at the pitch stage. And what happens is like, you fill in the gap. Like this happens a lot when an investor is like looking for a company that does X, and they find a founder working something in that problem set. And they're like, oh, I found it. I found the thing in my head. And it's like, they make the investment, they hunt it down, they close the deal, and they get into the relationship. They're like, what they realize that instead of asking questions, they filled the white spaces in between. And what they realize is they filled them in different colors. And like, when you get into the conversation about what's actually getting built or where the product direction is going or what could be there, they try to push, they try to nudge in that direction. And when you start to nudge, it's uncomfortable. And rather than be like transparent about like, I think your opportunity is this, you're the founder, you're building this, I believe there is an opportunity in this category that I think you should explore, versus like, you need to do X. And like, that's this like weird tension that sometimes builds. And the need to do, or you should do, or like that is something that I've stamped out in myself. Like, I'm all for having transparent discussion about where I think there is opportunity, but the you need to, or you should, that like, that push gets weeded out of people fast in this ecosystem, or you just like, you explode because you build a really shitty reputation and you like build something as like, that's the VC who's like super hands-on and pushy and trying to like manipulate the vision of the company. And like, it's just a bad look all around. I think there's just got to be an admission, like, I want to invest in people going after, you invest in like the founder and you invest in like what their vision is, not what you want their vision to be. And so like, but that I've seen that, like what you're referencing, I've seen that start all the way at the pitch stage. And it's tied to like, again, it's when you start dating someone and you think like, oh, I found this person and they are all of these things. You fill in the blank spaces in between rather than asking those questions. It's an interesting sort of a natural tendency that I think filters into all different parts of like relationships. And
for the founders listening to this, there you go. Like if you sense that you're pitching to somebody and that's what's happening, watch out. Now,
yeah, and it's okay to ask both ways. Like, it's really important to ask, like, hey, this is the vision that I have. Like, is this the vision that you align with, or are you in line with like when you hear I've been looking for this, like, make sure that this is the same this, because like that word, that little short 4-letter word might be totally different products, might be totally different go-to-markets. Like, this hides a lot of detail, and like getting an understanding for what this is and making sure we're both aligned on this is actually like a super important, exercise.
It is. And on this, let's cover the sectors that you're looking at the moment. So one of the things that we were talking about last time we caught up was, we're filming this right now during somewhat opening up post-COVID. And, some of the themes that emerged during this time were around remote work and online events and an increase in health products. But maybe we just lay the groundwork with what are the areas that you're interested in looking at the moment that, are unique to the times that we're living in versus those that are just kind of what you're interested in, period?
I mean, there's certain things that are just obvious now that like part of our job is like finding things before they're obvious, right? Like, and holding that discomfort. One of the nice things and the challenging things of this moment is a lot of the categories that we were investing into, for the last 5 years are now obvious to everybody. Good and bad in that. Like, the good in that is like, you don't have to hold this feeling of being, uncertain for a long time. The bad of it is now everybody is going investing into these things. So like, remote work is almost like a meme. Like once your investment category becomes a hashtag, you might have to look in another category. You might have to start looking elsewhere. But like the obvious things like video first, right? Like the idea that we're all now video first by, that there's a cost that wasn't there to in-person interaction has engendered an entirely new category. Like Zoom is a verb. If I ask people, had you been to a virtual event prior to this moment, they'd say, no, you're crazy. That sounds like some nerdery. And now it's like everyone has been to like, an online X, whether it's a class, a workout, a happy hour, a conference, we have to. And so like all these things that were going to be inevitable just got thrust into the future, years and weeks compressed. And so like, I think those trends are like not going anywhere. I think like those were inevitable on the exponential curve, and we just like, it's just like accelerated that future. I think like the things that are also sort of tied to that are this idea of like how do we communicate around our work process? Like all the things that used to be able to do by being in the same physical space, like have to be represented somehow digitally, right? And it's like the little moments. It's like the nooks and crannies around like the look over the experience of looking over someone's shoulder or whiteboarding in a room, or like, you know, as you were building a model together, like sitting around a laptop or sitting next to each other and you were co-located, like you have to represent those things digitally. And it turns out like if your current methodology for, you know, doing that is like sending a file back and forth, that's a really shitty way to communicate. And so like having some sort of like real time multiplayer modality, like, you know, cloud interactivity, like those things that, you know, we've seen in design, we've seen in like, you know, databases, we've seen in like spreadsheet, like all of those things are now forced to be like real-time digital cloud native multiplayer mobile, like obvious. Pick your big category. If it's like on-prem tied to, you know, if it's single player on-prem, you know, in an essential business modality, like it's now going to be cloud first, multiplayer, mobile enabled, you know, those things are somewhat obvious now. Because you got to do it in a way where you're dislocated.
What's the not obvious?
What's the not obvious? Is the answer is automation, I think, is finally getting to a place where it's going to be massively impacting all parts of our lives. And so like, you know, it's happened in the enterprise. There are a bunch of companies that are automating out like repetitive workflows, that whole process RPA ecosystem. I feel like that is the beginning of something that is going to permeate almost all parts of our world. And any process that's repetitive, if you do it more than once, or if you do it many times daily, like expect that process to be quick, automated, and beautiful. And I'm starting to see like founders take that understanding that has infiltrated the enterprise and apply it to like all parts of consumer life, from purchase to like scheduling to, you know, to all the little nooks and crannies that were like inefficiencies in your life, to applying for forms online, to navigating, you know, government services, to like all of the things that can be automated that like, you know, today require like some understanding of an archaic or complex system, you know, or some like chat with a person where they're saying the same thing over and over and over, like the phone tree style navigations, all of those things are going to start to be automated more. And that's a good thing. It's going to save a lot of people time.
So we're going to play a game.
Yeah. Ooh, let's do it.
I'm going to throw some sectors out at you.
Yeah.
And I want you to either just say, yep, obvious, not obvious. And then if it's not obvious, whether or not you think it's just that, even though it might be, you know, interesting times, that it's just that these times have forced to look at it in a different way. Yep. So here we go. First one is voice technologies, voice enabling technologies.
Super obvious. Come on. Like voice is like the hidden channel staring everybody in the face. You have every device. Everybody's got like 50 different mics and speakers in their ecosystem. They've got Alexas. They've got like their phone. They've got AirPods. Like this one's like, it's a no-brainer. Of course, voice and audio are like married together in a world where like, you know, I often look at sci-fi and I'm like, oh, of course that world's coming. And you look at the movie Her and it's whatever now, 10 years old or something, but it feels obvious. Like the combination of like more mics, more speakers, the combination of like voice, you know, analytics and like machine learning for like voice recognition, things like Otter that are now capturing more data, things like Hugging Face, which have made like, you know, really sophisticated NLP available to anybody. Like, I mean, if you don't believe that ecosystem is coming for us, where you're going to like interact with like machines using your voice, you're just not paying attention to the like proliferation of like device technology and the like the underpinnings that are getting built for it. And we're just starting to see like the products that are going to get built on top of it for work, for play, for fun, for everywhere. So yeah.
Next one. Property technologies.
Property technologies. I think obvious. I think like, again, it's such a massive part of GDP and like, you know, is real estate and like physical environment. I think the migration of like bits and bytes to atoms is like feeling more obvious to people, that you're going to have technology infiltrate, like, you know, the devices are getting smaller, you know, compute on the edge. There's just more stuff that you can do now in like devices and in intelligence in all parts of those workflows. And it's just a huge market. And so like my roommate in college, Brad Grywe, runs a fund called Fifth Wall. And he built Invitation Homes before it. He's a really smart human. He wouldn't be spending all of his time focused on it if he didn't believe it. And he
let me just qualify. When you're saying obvious about PropTech, are you saying that because there's a temptation to say all of these are obvious, but with the contraction, especially in people who are going to be able to pay for leaseholds and stuff like that, do you see that the PropTech is an obvious one long term, but it's just that short term it's not so obvious because there's a contraction in who's willing to pay for these products and services?
No, I think I think it's obvious because like, one, it's a massive, like here are the necessary conditions. Sorry, massive industry, historically untechified, multiple sort of like services getting built simultaneously that feel like for every part of the stack, from like how you live and the physicality of like devices at the edge, like that's getting easier and cheaper, and like you're just getting like all these like natural tailwinds for technology to move into an ecosystem. Mm-hmm. And then like when you start to look at like PropTech in every form, from like purchasing to leasing to like management of the properties, like all the things that go into the ecosystem, buying and selling land, like all of that has historically been pen and paper and facts and discussion that is now migrating into like cloud first, digital first, like, mobile, like it's just too big of an industry not to have all of those workflows built into it. And so in my mind, like, the answer is like obvious because huge ecosystem that's like legacy that like wasn't moving fast enough and is now like, being infiltrated from every perspective, from the consumer side with like smart homes and smart devices, all the way into like, the enterprise side with like techifying and bringing intelligence to like purchasing, managing, and all the workflows around like property. And so
fair enough. All right. Tools for developers to develop faster.
Super obvious.
I was specifically saying not dev tools, but like, IDEs and stuff like that. Super obvious.
Yes, yeah, super obvious. What?
Played out.
That everyone has realized that, we need to give like, that developers have superpowers to build technologies, that like powering them with more superpowers is like a good business because you can like, they're fast adopters and you can build interesting businesses, and they'll like, they can become infrastructure players for like a whole new world of like technologies that like selling an API can lead to a big business, right? Like, and if you market to a developer, you're marketing to the people who have massive leverage within a business. And they're now like, not just like the builders, they're also the decision makers for essential tools and services. And so like, you want to build new tools for those people because they become the things that power what it could be like massive scalable businesses and marketplaces, public and private companies. And so like, you're going to start to build dev tools because there's a lot of value at that point of entry. It's like, if you could build into the infrastructure for all of future companies, you would do that. And it's like layering foundational technologies by servicing them with great tools and APIs is just good business. So pretty obvious. The other thing is like, there's just more of them. And so like you have more developers, over time, and like selling to a growing ecosystem of new entrants is generally a good way to like build a business. So pretty obvious.
I'm trying to figure out how I can get a not obvious out of you. Let's see. VR. Is that played out still?
Not obvious. No.
There we go.
No. Yeah, like, and by the way, like I am the biggest nerd on the planet. I've bought every device. I was a gamer as a kid. I'm still a gamer. Like I want it so bad. Ready Player One, bring it to me. But we're in the middle of COVID and no one gives a crap about VR. Like nobody cares. Nobody wants to sit there with that experience in their head in it. Like it's just, I've invested in this category. I want it to work desperately. I want that future. Bring it to me now. But like, it's not obvious that anybody wants it, and you can't force something that people don't want yet. And I feel like we are at like the precipice of an iPhone moment. Like there was a lot of smartphones that were prior that didn't get the form factor nailed perfectly. It feels like the technology is getting to a place, and we've had enough false starts yet where like someone is going to nail it. So like we are at the place of visual first immersive compute. Like that feels like it is coming, but it is today's form factor is not obvious that is going to work. But it is obvious to me that I want that in the future, and that we are one huge step function away. We are an iPhone moment away from it being, a trigger for everyone. And that is not obvious to me that is immediate. And it won't be until we see the iPhone for this key category.
So the last one in the category is kind of stemming from the VR question. And this is mostly because of the volume of solutions out there, but live audio, whether it be a new podcast platform, a new broadcast platform, a new content maker? Played out or not played out?
No, it's just getting started. And the reason for live audio is because like, it is a weirdly intimate channel, and it is a really powerful channel for communication. And like, there's nothing like this discussion. And we could be doing this on audio, and we've done this on audio before. And there's something about the human voice that like brings an intimacy. So a lot of the people I'm sure are going to be listening to this as a podcast, not a video, and they're going to hear my voice, and they will know me better than any tweet or any email could possibly get to know me. And there's something beautiful and human in that, and like expanding that experience of like storytelling. We are a spoken animal. Like our voice is one of the things that, you know, makes us most unique in this world. And I think that as we start to understand how to process that, you know, better, and like build those connectivities, provide context, you know, what Discord has done for gaming, provide that context into all of these different channels around music, or what Clubhouse has done in like bringing Twitter moments to life and Twitter groups to life. Like there's something beautiful and special and intimate, and it feels like almost campfire-y, and it feels like we haven't quite nailed what that's going to be, but I believe that it's actually just as powerful as video for a lot of people, because it's multimodal. When you're doing audio, you can be passive and there and doing all of these other things. Like you can actually multitask and listen to a discussion and have a conversation and have hands free and be doing other things and be going for a walk and be anywhere on the planet. And that freedom is really powerful. And if we can nail great experiences that are content rich with live audio synced to it, it's like, it's just a really, you know, interesting moment for all of this stuff. And then on top of that, you're layering interactivity. Like the voice bots are actually getting to a place where they're functional, where Siri and Alexa and these things can interact with you, and there's enough sort of Siri. My Alexa literally started talking in the background, where you can like literally have like you know, interactivity with your voice. That's a really powerful confluence of events that are all happening simultaneously, and so I'm super bullish on it.
Well, guys, I think we've had quite a good exhaustive list of sectors. All of them, still lots of opportunities to crack, which is a great thing to hear from you, Matt. It's really encouraging to hear that. If anybody,
right on, man.
This. And we really enjoyed chatting. I mean, I could definitely keep on asking you questions. I love chatting with you. It's always, I love the energy, but I also know that if I were a founder, I would be like, this is the guy I want to work with. So
man.
You know how to get a hold of him on the website. I'm sure that you can find a way of getting in touch. I don't know if, Matt, you share your details or people.
Yeah, Matt Mazzeo on Twitter. I'm pretty active in the DM, so just hit me up.
Cool. Well, with that, guys, thanks for joining us, Matt.
You got it, bud. Thanks, Carlos. Great to hang. Always fun, man. All right.